You are watching an OraCloud Plus Training as a Service video snippet. Snippets are concise, targeted tutorials explaining how to use, configure, integrate, deploy, and support Oracle's Fusion Cloud applications. Snippets are delivered via FAST, the Fusion Application Support Tool. FAST is accessible via the web at www.oracloud.plus. No more watching hours of learning path style videos to get to the 5-minute snippet you need. Learn Oracle's Fusion Cloud applications in minutes, not hours. Hello and welcome to the Requisition Fusion versus PeopleSoft video presentation. This video is intended for existing PeopleSoft licensees looking to learn more about Fusion's Procurement Cloud requisition application, obviously in relation to what they already have in PeopleSoft. It highlights the advantages of Fusion's Purchase Requisition functionality versus PeopleSoft's eProcurement requisition functionality. Please note this conversation is limited to just requisitioning functionality, and I wouldn't consider it exhaustive, meaning there's probably a few more. This video snippet, as with all OraCloud Plus video snippets, can be found within FAST, our Fusion application support tool. To gain access to FAST, email OraCloud Plus at access@oracloud.plus. Please include your name and contact information, as well as set the email title to FAST access request. Okay, so our key topics for this presentation are as follows. Informational catalog/items or pointers, the ability to easily extend the request or requisition dataset, depth of pre-negotiated content and its functionality, ease of content management, ability to see price breaks during item search, post-requisition transaction linkage, ability to add multiple suppliers within the request, purchasing line types, the ability to use requisition as procurement engagement request form, visual reporting, so mainly OTBI, what's called Oracle Transaction Business Intelligence, and something called OAX, but we'll just reference the latter. And finally, improved requisition to sourcing integration. So lots on our plate. Let's jump in and quickly run through them. First up, the idea of an informational catalog item or a pointer. This is not something that exists in PeopleSoft and does in Fusion. So essentially what this is you're allowed to create what looks like a catalog item, but it doesn't get pulled into a requisition per se. It simply points to another website. That website could be internal policy, a quick start guide, or it could be pointing you to an airline portal, a Hertz rental car portal, like you see here in this example. So it's a pointer. That's an informational catalog item. Second, the ability to easily extend the requisition dataset. So within Fusion or most modern ERP applications, it's very easy to add additional fields, push those additional fields in different places, for example, data warehousing or OAX. And you see that here. Well, one of the ways to do it is to add a grouping of fields, and then you can either link them to a category. So when I purchase something or put something in my cart from a requisition and it's for the computer category, it asks me questions. Or I can make them resident on a particular smart form. So for example, if I want to create a form for my requesters to engage sourcing and competitive bid, I might want to ask what's the targeted sourced amount versus the budgeted rec line amount. So that's second, just the ability to easily extend the requisition dataset in Fusion as opposed to PeopleSoft. Third up, the just depth of pre-negotiated content. So everybody's got local catalogs and punch-outs, but not only is there more content, so the informational catalog item, the idea of a smart form, which is similar to what PeopleSoft calls an express form, just without all the headache of having data record definition, having to make space, having to change pages. Again, architecturally, cloud is just different and easier. And so you also, you have the same import functionality that you have from third-party applications. You also have the same supply chain functionality from an auto replenishment standpoint from inventory. But the idea of having lots of pre-negotiated catalog, so all of those plus the informational item and a few other tweaks on those, is just a little bit more being offered within Fusion. Next is the ease of content management. And so if you're going to create an item first in PeopleSoft, you need to create a physical item, purchase item adder. There's a lot of overhead. And it's not that Fusion doesn't have an item with overhead. It does. They're called transactional items and they're produced through PIM and they feel similar to PeopleSoft. But what Fusion has that PeopleSoft doesn't have is the ability to go to a line on a procurement contract, or what Fusion calls an agreement, and create a definitional item with imagery. And so it's this idea of easily being able to create these definitional items, add them to blanket purchase agreements. That's kind of the sister, if you will, to a procurement contract. Then the ease of which you can make those catalogs or the lines on the BPAs, definitional items, if you will, into catalogs. In fact, you can set it up so every time you add one, it automatically becomes a catalog and shows up in a self-service item search. And then obviously the ease of which you can expose catalogs to those requesters. So if I wanted to restrict catalogs or within PeopleSoft, I have to get into trees and security, and it's a lot of headache that as consultants we rarely did, simply because the juice, the squeeze outweighed the juice, if you will. When you're in Fusion, anybody can do this. It's very, very simple and very, very fast. So your ability to create an agreement, to create catalog on that, and then to take that content and expose it to a group of requesters, to a business unit, to a particular requester on down the line. Just easier, simpler, faster. Then lastly, there's this idea of a taxonomy within Fusion. And so again, what used to be difficult in trees and to go into Tree Manager, and really honestly, it's not so much that it's difficult, but if you want to send a buyer or somebody in sourcing that's a functional operational business user into Tree Manager, you're going to struggle. In Fusion, you don't have that struggle because the tool set is just easier and more intuitive. So what you see here on the bottom is the ability to manage the taxonomy that organizes items. And so you not only have that ability to change the shop by taxonomy, the reporting taxonomy, or the reporting flows off of that taxonomy, you can default accounting so much easier and different than you can in PeopleSoft inside Fusion, because you have an account defaulting engine. And it allows you to say, I could use my item category like I do in PeopleSoft, but I could also use my taxonomy. I could, in fact, create other sources such as the requisition and business unit. So if you're global and you have different tax rules in different requisition business units or read countries, it's easier and more intuitive to set up and maintain, let alone assets and projects. So you get the idea. Managing and the ease of content management is just easier in Fusion in many different respects than it is in PeopleSoft. Next up, this is an easy one. One of the frustrations in PeopleSoft was that you couldn't see the final price because the request was looking at an item that didn't factor in potential agreements, or what we called procurement contracts, because it couldn't architecturally. It wasn't built that way. Well, in Fusion, as you can see here, I'm searching for an item. First of all, the item is easier to create, like we talked about in definitional. Second of all, I can create easy images inside here. I can link them to my item. But third and most important, if I've got two different reams of paper and one has a price break discount, I can see that in Fusion. I wasn't even able to get the right data to make the best decision inside PeopleSoft because of how my procurement contract related to the request item I was searching. Solved in Fusion. Next up, the amount of post-requisition transaction linkage. So I do think that PeopleSoft had a very nice visual, we used to call it the line of life in the requisitioning tool. However, it was missing contracts, it was missing sourcing, it was missing some things downstream, returns. Well, you don't have those issues inside Fusion, as you can see here, whether you're recs to a contract, to an agreement, to a sourcing event, or obviously to a purchase order, receipt, invoice. You have visibility downstream. And so it's not that you have so much more, but you have complete visibility. And so empowering your requesters to manage their own transaction doesn't have holes in it because it's in sourcing, it's in contracts, etc. Next up, the ability to add multiple suppliers from a requisition. So this isn't groundbreaking, but what they did do in Fusion is they made it so that you could leave the requisition. If you wanted to add one supplier, just like every application, you click a box in your requisition, it opens up some fields and you put custom supplier information in. the problem wasn't that, even in PeopleSoft. The problem is what when I have 2 or 3 suppliers I'd like to suggest for sourcing to take a look at? Well, within Fusion, they allow you to connect over to what we'll call the registration on OBO on behalf of the supplier or internal registration. So I can go repetitively and recursive logic through just request supplier, and then do my requisition. Self-contained, easier, more intuitive. So again, empowering requesters, they can do more easily. Next up, so this is called purchasing line type. So if you know within PeopleSoft, the payables account default hierarchy, this is something that they didn't have in PeopleSoft. They added a line type. So at the line type, I can say good, I can say service, I can say outcome-based service, deliverable-based service, fixed price service. And then more importantly, I can start to default some rules around or values around that purchasing line type, most notably matching. So I could match differently to my deliverable services than my fixed price services, than my variable rate services, than my time and expense, whatever your different classifications of services are. So it's kind of nice. And it allows me to keep 3-way, let's say, for my large dollar services and my goods, while making 2-way for my low dollar services. Just depends on how you configure it. Next up, and this is a really nice one. So the idea of using requisitions to engage procurement. So requisitions can be limited. What about when I want to buy a Bloomberg market data terminal, but all of a sudden I don't necessarily want that to become a purchase order because I already have an existing contract. I have to go through a portal. Well, but I have to make sure what's being requested gets approved, and I have to make sure that it gets to the buyer to update the contract. So what you can do is you can start to mix these metaphors, create different line types that says it's a subsister initiator to Bloomberg, or let's say to facilities. I want to move something. Well, that's not even a request. I'm not advocating using Fusion to do everything, but I am advocating the flexibility because you can append different listings of questions with drop-down values, make them required, conditional, etc. And I can do that all within the request tool. And even if I want to do something as opaque as ask procurement, I can set the purchasing line type for that request to be $0. I can make sure $0 doesn't go to a data lake or to OAX or data warehouse reporting. The flexibility in these applications is on a different level. And so adding request questions for non-catalog requests, it's very straightforward and it's very powerful. So next up, visual real-time reporting. So there's a tremendous amount of reporting and there's 2 major differences in Fusion than there are in PeopleSoft. In PeopleSoft, I have OTBI, or BI Publisher rather, and so I can create queries. But the ease with which I can append visually appealing output, better in Fusion. The ability to create tiles, because the infolets and the pivot tables never really took off in PeopleSoft, just like so many other things, including content management. It was too difficult. And so its impact was limited. Good technology, great technology, but it was just limited because it wasn't intuitive. And so the tools, as they get easier, they have higher adoption. And so you can see putting these nice output imagery on top of a query, that's one. But the second, and I don't believe it's something that exists inside of PeopleSoft, is you have on the left a dashboard. The dashboard is governed by several high-order pieces of information or data values or data sets. And every single query gets rolled into an image, rolled into a dashboard that's governed by some high-order data values, global values, such as business units. So even though I'm looking at invoices open, negotiation statuses, I can high-order key them by a date or a business unit on a dashboard. So again, the tools are simply more advanced than they were in PeopleSoft. And then lastly, improved sourcing integration. So this is a requisition discussion, but because requisition is the initiator to a sourcing event for the non-catalog, well, there's some definite advantages that we'll see in terms of the integration. So as we have talked about earlier, the life cycle of requisition, the ability to see sourcing, see where it's at, see the status is important. the ability for the source rec to be used to create a purchase order. So in PeopleSoft, oftentimes, either the requisition, once it went into the agreement, was burnt. You couldn't use it to create to the PO and link it to the procurement contract. That's all doable and easy in Fusion. So those next two source rec used to link or create PO and link that you can do in Fusion. And then lastly, there was this other problem about I have a rec for 10, I award to 20. Where does the approval come? So that's been handled better, easier, and more intuitively inside Fusion than it was in PeopleSoft. Lastly is this idea of a rec or order transaction history in sourcing. So all of the requisitions that we're creating are available by clicking on the supplier hyperlink when you're inside of Fusion sourcing or negotiations. And so you have the ability to see not just the supplier scorecard, so for how many events have they accepted, have they participated, have they been awarded, but you can also see the rec and the order transaction history as well. Okay, so that was a lot, but are you ready for the next video? Well, do you understand the major differences between PeopleSoft's eProcurement requisitions and Fusion's Procurement Cloud requisitions? If the answer is no, then either watch again or feel free to reach out to me directly. You can see here on the left, that's my email address, and I'm always available to answer questions. If the answer is yes, great, then maybe you want to watch more video. So you can go to our playlist out on YouTube by going to YouTube and searching on OraCloud Plus Inc. Or you can go from our website to the tool we call FAST, the Fusion Application Support Tool, and you can access the full catalog of our Learn, Use, Configure, Integrate, Deploy, and Support videos online. So that's it for this tutorial. We hope you found it informative, and keep watching.